You're still awake? That's all right. You're safe here. You found your way back to the Lady Mythos. Here, we don't rush. We listen to stories the world whispered in secret, to women who walked out of the lines written for them, to truths that have flickered like candlelight through centuries. Before you drift off, if there's a story you like to hear, or a place you're listening from, I'd love to know. Leave a comment anytime. It helps me imagine this little circle we share. You, me, and the myths between us. Tonight, I want to tell you about Lilith. Chapter 1. Lilith in the Desert Night. Picture a night in the ancient Near East, thousands of years ago. The sun has gone down, and with it the heat that presses against your skin all day has finally loosened. The air cools, carrying dust and the faint smell of distant fires. The stars are sharp, impossibly sharp, glittering like points carved into black stone. The moon rises pale and watchful, turning the sand into silver. In the distance, you can hear a jackal's cry, high, eerie, cutting across the night. An owl stares in a ruined wall, blinking with wide eyes that seem to know too much. This is not an empty night. It is alive. To the people who lived here, the darkness was never silent. It was never just absence. The night was a presence all its own. By day, life belonged to the human world. Bustling markets, clay vessels carried on shoulders, priests chanting hymns in temple courts, children playing where the sun poured down on courtyards of mud brick and stone. But by night, the balance shifted. Shadows stretched long, and with them came the sense that other beings moved freely. Spirits, demons, gods, too wild to be seen by daylight. People believed the darkness was full of eyes. Eyes that watched, eyes that judged, eyes that slipped between cracks in doors and windows. To them, the night was not empty silence. It was the domain of powers unseen, sometimes protective, often dangerous. And in this world, if a child sickened in the night, if a fever struck, or if a baby was lost before its first cry, the blame was not cast into the void. It had a name whispered by mothers under their breath, a name carved into clay balls buried beneath the floor, a name invoked to ward off the dangers that come while the world sleeps. That name was Lilith. But before she becomes a woman with a voice, before she is remembered as Adam's first wife, she begins here, in the deep imagination of Mesopotamia, as a figure of the night, a wind spirit, a dangerous beauty, a Lilitu. Pause for a moment and let that sink in. Because when we speak her name now, thousands of years later, we are speaking across time to one of the oldest surviving figures of myth, older than the Greek goddesses, older than the Norse sagas, older even than the Bible as we know it. She belongs first to this desert night, to the wind moving over reed huts and palace walls, to the cries of owls circling above, to the space between walking and sleeping, where dreams turn uneasy. That is the world we need to step into if we are to understand Lilith. Not the glossy paintings of the Renaissance, not the occult revival of the 19th century, not even the feminist retellings of today, but the raw, uncertain, half-shadowed world of the ancient Near East, where people knew the dark could take as well as shelter, and so they named it, feared it, and tried to protect themselves against it. And into the darkness, the figure of Lilith, or Lilitu, took form. Chapter 2: Lilith's Mesopotamian Origins. If we follow Lilith back, before she is called Adam's wife, before she is turned into a demoness in folklore, we find her first traces not in Hebrew scripture, but in the clay libraries of Mesopotamia. It is the 3rd millennium BCE. The Sumerians are building the world's first great cities: Erech, Nippur, Eridu. They carve hymns and lists onto clay tablets with reed styluses, the wedge-shaped cuneiform script, pressing knowledge into earth that will survive for thousands of years. Among these texts are references to a class of spirits, the Lilu and the Lilitu. The world themselves are built from Lil, meaning air or wind. These are wind spirits, often restless, often dangerous. The male Lilu appear in incantations as figures who seduce women at night. The female Lilitu are said to prowl after men, haunting their sleep, whispering to them in fevered dreams. They hover at the edges of childbirth, threatening newborns, or slipping into homes through windows left open to the night. In some incantations, the Ardas lily appears, a young, unmarried female spirit, often associated with men's nocturnal emissions, thought of as a restless ghost of a woman who died before marriage. Her loneliness, her lack of fulfillment, is imagined as predatory. She takes what she cannot have in life. This is the soil out of which Lilith first grows. Not yet a singular woman, but a type of being, dangerous, nocturnal, sexual, tied to wind and disease, but also alluring. A figure both feared and desired. Now, picture the context. Mesopotamian households worried constantly about infant mortality. Archaeological records show that even in prosperous families, many children never reach their first year. To explain such losses, people did not say chance or illness. They gave it a face, a will. Lilitu became the reason. Imagine her, a mother rocking her child in a dim clay-walled room. The oil lamp trembles, shadows slide across the wall. The wind pushes through the cracks like a whisper. To her, that wind was not just weather. It might be Lilith passing by. She tightens the cloth around her baby and breathes a prayer. Lilith, pass over this house. Lilith, go no further. The baby stares. The mother places a small charm at the cradle's edge, carved with names she can barely pronounce. Names of angels who promise to stand guard. She doesn't look outside, because to look in the dark is to invite it in. Archaeologists have unearthed some of these protections, incantation bowls dating from around the 5th to 7th century CE, but echoing older traditions. They are simple ceramic bowls inscribed in spirals with protective texts. Many of them mention Lilith directly. Families placed them upside down and buried them under the threshold of the house, hoping to trap the demoness beneath and keep her from crossing inside. Others relied on amulets, small plaques or charms with figures of protective spirits. Some invoked Pazuzu, the demon of wind and storms. Ironically, feared himself, but called upon to repel war's dangers, especially Lilith. To ancient households, demons could only be fought with other demons. And then there is the artifact many have come to associate with Lilith, the burning relief, also called the Queen of the Night plaque. It dates to around 1800 BCE. It shows a winged nude woman with bird's talons instead of feet, standing on lions, flanked by owls. Her hands are raised in a gesture of power. Scholars debate whether this figure is Lilith or the goddess Ishtar, or perhaps Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld. There is no inscription naming her, but the imagery resonates with later ideas of Lilith. Wings of night, owl companions, sexuality mingled with menace. Even if the figure was not originally meant to be her, later cultures saw her there, and the association has clung ever since. So in Mesopotamia, Lilith begins not as a woman, but as a fear woven into daily life. The fear of sudden sickness, the fear of a child lost in the night, the fear of desire itself, ungovernable, breaking into the order of marriage and law. It is important to remember, these were not abstract stories. These were living anxieties. The clay balls, the amulets, the whispered spells, all archaeological evidence of people trying to hold back the night. And in that night, Lilith was waiting. Chapter 3. Lilith in the Epic of Gilgamesh. When we think of Lilith, most people imagine a woman in Eden, a dark bride beside Adam. But her story is older than that, far older. Her shadow flickers even in the world's first great epic, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Written in Sumer and Akkad, copied and recopied on clay tablets, the epic is nearly 4,000 years old. It tells of Gilgamesh, king of Erech, part gold, part man, and his struggles with love, death, and the search for immortality. But within its verses, in a tale about a tree, we catch a glimpse of Lilith. The story goes like this. In the first days, when the gods still walked upon the earth, a goddess, Inanna, the queen of heaven, found a young Huluppu tree growing on the banks of Euphrates River. She carried it to her sacred garden in Erech, dreaming that one day its wood would be used to craft a throne and a bed worthy of her majesty. But the tree was not hers alone. Other beings took shelter there. At its roots coiled a great serpent. In its branches rested the zoo bird, stretching its wings against the sky. And in its hollow, dwelling in the trunk of the tree itself, there lived a dark spirit, a woman of the night, a Lilitu. Most scholars believe this is one of the earliest mentions of Lilith. She is not named Lilith in the way we would recognize later, but the word used Lilitu marks her as one of those wind-born nocturnal beings. Already in one of humanity's oldest stories, she is there, a restless presence, inhabiting the liminal spaces, refusing to be tamed. Now think of what this image would have meant to those who heard it. Picture the tree in Inanna's garden, roots gripping the soil, branches reaching toward the stars. The tree itself is not just any plant. Trees in Mesopotamian thought were cosmic symbols. Roots in the underworld, branches in the heavens, trunks linking earth to sky. To plant a tree in a sacred garden was to plant a bridge between worlds. And what lives in such a tree? Creatures that themselves belong to thresholds. The serpent, a creature of earth, feared and revered. The bird, a creature of the sky. And the Lilitu, a woman of the night, neither fully mortal nor divine, neither fully inside society nor outside of it. The presence of Lilith in the tree turns the story into something more than a gardening tale. She is the danger that comes with creation, the uncontrollable force that resists being pressed into order. For Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, this becomes a problem. She wants her throne. She wants her bed. She wants the tree made into something useful, something beautiful. But she cannot, because these beings have taken hold of it. It is only when Gilgamesh arrives that the intruders are banished. The tree shakes, the serpent slithers away, the bird screams into the sky, and the Lilitu darts out, her hair streaming like dark fire, her talons cutting the air. She doesn't die, she doesn't plead. She flees into the desert, the only place wide enough to hold her. So what do we learn about Lilith from this early appearance? She's a squatter of sacred space. She lives in the tree that was meant to be a throne. She takes for herself what was meant for the goddess. She is also difficult to uproot. Inanna herself cannot remove her. It takes the strength of Gilgamesh, the archetypal hero, to drive her out. Already, Lilith is a force that demands more than ordinary effort to expel. And finally, She is a figure of the wilderness. When driven out, she doesn't die. She doesn't beg. She flees into the desert, into the open spaces where the winds move freely. This will become her pattern for centuries, expelled from order, but never erased, always returning in the next shadow. Archaeologists have found echoes of this tale in visual art. Cylinder seals, small carved stones rolled across clay to make repeating patterns, sometimes show sacred trees flanked by human figures, serpents and birds. In some of these, a winged female figure is present too, long haired, with talons for feet. Scholars debate whether these images represent Lilith, or Inanna, or some other goddess. But what matters for us is that the same constellation of symbols appears again and again: tree, serpent, bird, winged woman. Even if the figure in these seals is not called Even if the figure in these seals is not called Lilith, the mythic imagination was already circling around the same archetype, a female being connected to the night, to wildness, to the danger of fertility and the threshold between safety and threat. Imagine yourself in the ancient Erech, sitting in a courtyard at night, listening to a bard chant the story. You know the dangers of snakes. You hear the cry of night birds. You fear the sudden fevers that take children. You live in a world where demons and spirits are not fantasy. They are explanations for the everyday fragility of life. When you hear of the Lilitu in the tree, you do not think of a character in a story. You think of the being you already fear, the spirit that might slip through your window tonight, the one you must guard your family against. That is the power of Lilith in Gilgamesh's story. She is both myth and lived fear, story and superstition, already woven so deeply into life that no one needed to ask who she was. So here, in the earliest epic, Lilith makes her first real entrance. Not yet Adam's wife, not yet the demoness of later Jewish law, but already herself, nocturnal, wild, driven from the ordered world into the desert beyond. And that is where she will always return: the edge of things, the wilderness beyond the walls, the dark side of the garden. Lilith, the woman of the night. Chapter 4: Lilith as Adam's first wife. Most people today know Lilith not from Mesopotamian tablets or faint echoes in Gilgamesh, but from a far later tale, a Jewish text written sometime between the 8th and 10th centuries CE, called the Alphabet of Ben Sira. It is not scripture, it is a mixture of satire, folklore, and mystical teaching. But within its lines, Lilith receives the role that will make her unforgettable: the first wife of Adam. The story begins not with Eve, but with another woman. When Adam was made from the dust of the earth, so too was Lilith. She was formed at the same time, from the same substance. She was not taken from his side, not shaped from his rib, not made as an afterthought, but created equal. And here the story pauses. because for its original audience, this detail alone would have been startling. In a world where hierarchies governed everything, gods above mortals, kings above subjects, men above women, to imagine the first woman made from the same clay as the first man was to imagine equality at the deepest level of creation. But equality in this story does not lead to peace. Soon, Adam and Lilith come into conflict. The Alphabet of Ben Sira tells us that when they lay together, Adam insisted he should be above, and Lilith below. This was not only a sexual position, it was a symbol of order, of dominance and submission, of who held power in the very first human bond. But Lilith refused. "We are the same," she said. "We were both created from the earth. Why should I lie beneath you?" In that refusal, she becomes more than a character. She becomes a symbol of resistance to hierarchy itself. For the storytellers of the early Middle Ages, this refusal was not heroic. It was dangerous, scandalous. But for us, listening now, it glows with a certain fire. The story then sharpens. Adam tries to force her into obedience. Lilith resists and refuses. He presses her down. She fights him off. And at last, in desperation, she utters a name. Not just any name, but the ineffable name of God. A name so holy that even to speak it aloud was considered unthinkable. In Jewish tradition, this name was never pronounced, only written with the 4 letters, YHWH. But Lilith speaks it. The ground trembles, the air parts, and in that moment, she is lifted into the air. Clay feet leaving the soil, hair streaming, eyes burning with the fire of freedom. With the divine name on her lips, she takes flight and escapes Eden. She doesn't look back. She will never look back. This detail is extraordinary. In a single line, Lilith claims for herself the greatest power available, the secret of God's own name. It is both her rebellion and her transformation. She is no longer just a woman resisting Adam. She becomes a being who can transcend the boundaries of Eden itself. Adam, left alone, cries out to God, "The woman you gave me has fled." And so God sent 3 angels to pursue her, Sinoi, Sansanoi, and Samanjalof. Their names will echo for centuries, etched onto amulets hung above cradles, whispered in incantations, remembered as Lilith's eternal adversaries. The angels find her by the Red Sea, a place of thresholds, where desert meets water, where boundaries dissolve. They command her, return to Adam, or suffer the consequences. But Lilith refuses. She will not go back. The angels threaten her with a terrible punishment. Every day, 100 of her children will die. Lilith does not yield. She accepts the cost. Better to lose her children, better to carry the curse, than to return to the bondage of Eden. And so a bargain is struck. She will not harm infants who are protected by the names of the 3 angels. This is why, in Jewish folklore, for centuries after, mothers would hang amulets above a newborn's bed, inscribed with those names, warding Lilith away. Archaeologists have found many of these artifacts, clay bowls and small charms with the spiraling wards of protection. The name of Sanoi, Sansanoi, and Samanjalov circling the rim. They are the material proof of fear and of belief. This tale, from the Alphabet of Ben Sira, is not ancient in the way the Gilgamesh tablets are. It was written in the medieval period, long after Judaism had absorbed centuries of Babylonian and Persian influence. But it fusses all those older strands into something new. Lilith, the night demon, becomes Lilith, the woman. The restless wind spirit becomes the first bride of humanity. The predator of children becomes the mother who loses her own. And in the heart of it all is that act of refusal. She will not lie beneath Adam. She will not return, even when threatened. She would rather live cursed and exiled than accept submission. For medieval families, this was not a poetic metaphor. Lilith was terrifyingly real. Infant mortality was high. Women died in childbirth. Dreams and fevers struck without warning. To name Lilith was to give shape to those dangers, to make them something you could protect against. So people wrote her name into their prayers. They carved the angels' names onto bowls. They whispered stories of Adam's first wife, who became the mother of demons. And each time, they kept her alive, not only as a figure of fear, but as a presence too powerful to be forgotten. So here, in the Alphabet of Ben Sira, Lilith becomes more than a shadow. She becomes a voice, a woman who speaks, who refuses, who claims the name of God and takes flight. And in that moment, she is fixed forever in human imagination. Not merely a demon of the wind, but the woman who would not bow. And that is where we'll leave Lilith for tonight. No longer Adam's equal in Eden, but no less powerful. A woman who spoke the secret name and chose exile over submission. She has taken flight into the night, into the wilderness where ruins crumble and owls keep watch. Her story, though, is far from over. In the next episode, we'll follow Lilith beyond Eden, into the world of amulets and incantation bowls, angel names written on clay, and the rituals families used to keep her away in the long dark hours of the night. Thank you for listening to the Lady Mythos. Sweet dreams and sleep tight. And when night falls again, I'll be here waiting to tell you the rest. Until then, good night.